Sup y'all, it's me, it's your boy Asmongold, and today I want to talk to you guys about some of the changes that are going to be made in patch 7.1.5 in regards specifically to how secondary stats are going to be calculated on your character sheet, and also in a broader sense how I think Blizzard is going to be approaching scaling in Legion, and even going forward from that. And I guess a TLDR here is that Blizzard is going to be, for lack of a better term, scaling back to scaling in Legion by basically making each percentage of mastery, critical strike, or haste that you want to get to harder to get to. So right now, as an example, if it took 1,000 mastery to get to 1% of mastery points, in 7.1.5 it will take 1,200 or 1,500 mastery to get that same 1% of mastery points, and that goes for critical strike, haste, and I'm assuming versatility as well. So the reason that they're doing this, I think there's two reasons. Number one is that this is going to be the obvious one, is I think players are reaching power levels that we don't usually see until the end of the expansion. Like, people have already got like over 100 mastery, over like 50% crit. It's fucking ridiculous, right? So I think that's part of it. And also they're going to be changing the way that jewelry works in 7.1.5. And the way that they're doing that, because, all right, let me just say this right now, is that I don't know about you guys, but I kind of feel pretty stupid whenever I get an item level 880 ring and somehow it's not better than my item level 850 ring because my item level 850 ring has better secondary stats. So Blizzard is basically increasing the scaling on the rings and making the rings scale higher to where if a ring is within over 15 item levels higher than what you already have, regardless of the secondary stats, it should still be better than what you had if it's over 15 item levels higher. So I think that is kind of a good idea. I'm not really a huge fan of the, item level is the holy grail of if gear is good or not, but at a certain point, I can see why they're doing this. I think that one of the big problems that they kind of did is in WoD they got rid of reforging. I thought that was a really, really dumb idea. Most people do. I might talk about that later on in a video, but basically I think if they added back in reforging, they would have never even had to do this in the beginning, and they wouldn't have had to change all of these different stat weights. They would have avoided this entire problem, but of course it seems like they're taking the path of most resistance, and especially if you read the forums, you can see it. That's definitely what a lot of people feel like as well. So the second, or I guess that is the second reason, but basically I guess like what they were trying to do in Legion is reduce the power gap between a very, very geared player and a very, very under-geared player in terms of how much secondary stats that they have. So as an example, in a previous expansion, whenever you're playing a Fury Warrior, at the beginning of the expansion, you were probably like really, really shitty. It was super unfun to play, but by the time you got to the end of the expansion, you had like 50% crit, like full mastery, and rage all the time. You're a fucking god. So you're always wanting to play Fury at the end of the expansion, and then whenever the new expansion comes around, it's a bummer, right? So as an example, what Blizzard tried to do is they tried to lessen the gap between at the end of the expansion power levels and the beginning of expansion power levels in terms of like mastery percentages and crit percentages. So as an example, like just throwing this out there, like the mastery one, if you had 10% crit at the beginning of the expansion and at the end of the expansion, this is previous expansions before Legion, you had 50% crits, so that's a 40% difference. Now in Legion, you're going to start off with, let's say, 25% crits, but you're only going to end with something like 40% crits. Now, I think that there are advantages and disadvantages to this, but I do think ultimately it's probably a better idea. But I think that the ultimate problem that's underlying all of this is how many power increases that Legion already has. In between all of the Mythic Plus difficulties, in between all 4 of the raid difficulties, there are so many notable power increases that have to occur each time that whenever you put all of those together, you're having a huge power increase, something that you would see, like just the power increase that we've seen from Emerald Nightmare LFR, or like let's say just regular baseline 840 Mythic gear, all the way up to Emerald Nightmare Mythic, is more than what we had in all of Burning Crusade. It's absolutely insane. So as an example, I can give you guys some very, very basic numbers. At the end of Burning Crusade, very, very high absolute top DPS was something like maybe 2.7 to 3.2k. And at the beginning of Burning Crusade, absolute top DPS was something like 1.5 to 2k. Now, obviously, those are like very, very high estimates with every single potion included, but as you can see, there are not really those huge increases in power. And if you go into Wrath of the Lich King as well, normal, you would see something like maybe something like 7k DPS on Patchwork in the first tier of Wrath of the Lich King, and then you'd be all the way up to over 20k DPS at the end of Wrath of the Lich King with ICC 25-man heroic gear. So because there are so many different power increases that are occurring in Legion, and this is not just the raid difficulties or the Mythic Plus difficulties, this is also artifact power, this is also legendaries. So there are all of these things that are coming together, and also the tertiary bonuses, and tertiaries don't really matter, but the socket bonuses really play a big part. Like imagine if you had a socket in every single piece of gear. That's like over like 2 or 3 pieces worth of secondary stat that you just get because you got lucky. So players that reach those same points are going to be so much more powerful. So there's, you know, like let's say the LFR, I guess like power level for Emerald Nightmare, which is like 835, and then normal mode is 850, then heroic is 865, and then mythic is 880. So you're having a huge difference, and people who start off right here just basically go through Emerald Nightmare over and over and over, and they just have to have so many different power increases, because if you don't have that, then obviously what you get, you know, from like heroic isn't really that compelling, because you already had something that was basically the same from normal mode. Now obviously you can use that argument with the Titan forging and everything, and I've used that multiple times. I think that honestly the scaling problems that they're running into are because basically they have so many different difficulties and so many different modes in the game, and they have to make each mode worthwhile, and they don't have any of these modes really overlapping each other in any sort of a meaningful way. Personally, I think that I mean, like in a perfect world, you guys know this, is that I think they have way too many raid difficulties. They should go back down to ideally 1, but, you know, I think like more realistically like 2 or 3 raid difficulties, so they don't have to make all of these different power increases, and we're not going to run into the same problems that we're having now, and we also had in WoD. If you just think that at the beginning of WoD, I remember I did top DPS, I felt that I was a god in my raid. Remember I did 27k on Mythic Kargath on our first week in Highmaul, and whenever we killed Mythic Archimond, I was doing something like 120k or something like that. I think it was like 110. So you're having an increase of like 2 or 3 or 4-fold, and it was even worse in Mists of Pandaria whenever you would end at like 600k DPS and you began at like 120. So these increases are just getting more and more as they increase the amount of different times that you can make that power jump. So I think that what Blizzard needs to do is it need to figure out how to consolidate some of these difficulties and still make it rewarding for players, and still give people something to go forward to and to get to that next level, but while at the same time not making there so many of them that the power increases, we're going to need a item squish every 2 expansions. Like there's no way, Blizzard even said already, that they're going to need to do another item squish and number squish after Legion. So we've only gone 2 expansions and we're already past the point where we were in Mists of Pandaria. So the scaling is just completely off the rails. Everything, it seems, I don't even really know what they're doing. It seems insane to me that they think this is like okay. I think that a lot of players are going to log on. I watched a Preach Gaming video about this, and he brought up a really good point, which is a lot of classes have these breakpoints that need to meet. I think that for an Arms Warrior, you need to have 20% haste in order to get an extra GCD within Battlecry, right? Because haste decreases your GCD, and so if you have 20% haste, you get that extra GCD inside Battlecry. So if you're like logging off before 7.1.5 and you have 20.5% haste and you log back on and you only have 17%, you are not only nerfed by that 3%, but you're also nerfed again because you're now missing that haste breakpoint. So there are a lot of people who are going to be nerfed more than other people because some classes have these breakpoints and some classes don't, and some breakpoints are more important than others. So I'm very, very concerned with how exactly this is going to be approached. And while Blizzard can potentially do this seamlessly, I don't really think that they will, because we only have 3 jewelry slots and there's like 15 or so slots besides jewelry, and so making those balance, it seems unlikely, basically. So I feel like if they added back reforging, that would be a really, really good idea. If they decrease the amount of raid difficulties and they got rid of... Basically, I think that at least on a Mythic level, I think that whenever you receive a piece of gear from Mythic, that you should be able to say, okay, this is the best piece of gear, so you don't have that, I guess, like that imaginary 5th level of difficulty with players that have Mythic gear that's socketed and Titan Forged or Warforged, because that is kind of, in another way, another 5th level of power creep inside the raid. It's just you don't really see that because it's very, very rare, for one, and also it takes a long time for it to actually happen, but you saw that at the end of of Mists of Pandaria. So I feel like with a lot of these changes, they're trying to make these like really kind of contrived and weird systems, like the, you know, scaling back the percentages and everything like that. They're trying to do all of this stuff because the fundamental system that they're working off of is flawed. And I feel like that's what they've been doing ever since Mists of Pandaria. And ultimately, like, we've been seeing these huge power increases ever since Wrath of the Lich King, which I think is no surprise because that's whenever they introduced effectively 4 different raid difficulties, 10-man, 25-man, and then there's a heroic and a normal mode for each one. So I don't really know like what they think is going to happen with this, but personally I can't really see this turning out very well. And also going forward beyond Legion, it's like, are we going to need to have another item squish every other expansion? It seems kind of, to me, I feel like it's kind of cool to go back and be able to clear you know, I did that guide. Oh, I didn't do that one yet, but I will. It's for Mythic Siege of Orgrimmar. I'm able to clear Mythic Siege of Orgrimmar, and being able to go in there solo and clear all that stuff because you're at that power level now, it feels kind of cool. And whenever all the scaling down stuff happened at the end of Mists of Pandaria, I never really thought that that felt particularly good. So I think that Blizzard needs to reevaluate the way that they look at power increases in the game and try to limit the amount of power increases that they have through figuring out different ways to consolidate difficulties and consolidate rewards. So I don't necessarily know if they're going to have that happen or what, but it sure seems like with the amount of changes that they're having to do and with everything else that's coming into play, it just sure seems like whenever you're having this much trouble, maybe you should look at the system that's giving you this much trouble. But I don't know. That's just me. I'd like to hear what you guys have to say too. You know, you guys know, like, I've got all my opinions, but basically I think if they would scale down, you know, the legendary increases and everything else that I've talked about a million times, they would at least have some level of control over this more than what they have now, because it seems like they're kind of just making things up as they go. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much all I've got. Thanks for watching, and like, comment, subscribe.